Welcome back, everybody. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. It's great to see you or hear from you. Your comments, your questions, your engagement means a lot to me, and I'm appreciative of everybody who tunes in to see this thing live, which is streaming on Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And we take the audio only version and put that onto a podcast, which you can listen to on Apple or you can listen to on Spotify or any of your preferred podcast destinations. This program is brought to you by my law firm, Armchair Attorney LLC. What makes Armchair so interesting is we got a trademark. We did it. It's registered. Wonderful. This program is also brought to you by ending non-competition agreements. I talk about them a lot, and I use this as a vehicle to talk about why I dislike non-competes. There's less than 20 days remaining for you to file a public comment with the Federal Trade Commission. After this comment period ends, there will be a time when a final rule is made. When that final rule is made, so many people who are bound by non-competes, and that number is astonishingly 30 million, 1 in 5 working Americans, will be free of the non-competes. Those documents will be rescinded, individualized notification that they are no longer bound by the non-compete. Now, I got to be clear. Ultimately, it will probably be sued and enjoined. We talked about last time. This is the nature of how this works. The way laws are made in this country is a process, and you don't always win the first time around. Sometimes you win the second time or the third time, or you don't win at all. But as always, thank you for tuning in. It's great to have everybody here. We see people making comments right now. Oh, I love these things. I'll put them in you can see them live here. If you're listening to this, you're not going to see or hear anything. But thank you, as always, for tuning in and supporting this adventure that we do. We don't know exactly why we do it, but we really do enjoy doing it. And we bring to you interesting guests that talk about things in law and supply chain. You see, supply chain is something that is everything. As we had last week with Mr. Supply Chain himself, Daniel Stanton, everything is supply chain. Everything is logistics. And when you need to get something, the question is always around, how does it get here? Did you know that driving a truck is the most common profession for high school educated men in the United States? In 35 different states, truck driving is the most common profession for everybody. That is to say, supply chain is how you get anything, whether it's manufacturing, distribution, fulfillment, at-home delivery, in your driveway fulfillment. Everything comes on a truck. But there's so much more to it. How do you know how much it costs to move something? Well, I have a very special guest for you today. And this very special guest is my good friend, Ken Adamo, and he'll be here in just a minute. Now, Ken has been gracious enough to give me this incredible vest. I wore this vest every single day on my vacation to the Ozarks because the pockets have zippers. And when you have young kids, you want to put your stuff in pockets that have zippers because you're not going to drop it, especially when you're in the Stark Caverns, which I recommend everybody visits. Now, enough about that talk. Let's get in my good friend, Ken Adamo.
Hey, good afternoon. How are you?
I am living La Vida Loca. That's what all the kids insist that I say. How are you doing, sir?
I think I'm doing about the same. That's about the same.
I love, we talked before we went live here. We share something in common. So I am today a father of 4. I have my oldest son, Michael, who's 10, my middle son, Rowan, who's 7, and I have my twins that are 4 months, soon to be for 5 months in a couple of weeks. How are you doing, man? How's it going?
Good. So I'm sitting on 3, waiting on 4 as well. So in about a month and a half here, we'll have the 4th Adamo boy to join the clan. So I'll officially be booted out of the golf foursome at some point. But maybe they'll let me follow them around in the cart and watch them play at some point. I don't know.
I will say, like, being a father is one of the most incredible joys of my entire life. It is exhausting. It's exhilarating. And I still wonder, like, am I doing it right? I don't think you ever really feel like, I've done it all right. Is that your experience so far?
Yeah. I mean, if I'm getting 10% of it right, I'm probably doing pretty well. You know, it's like keeping it out of the ditches, for lack of a better term. It's like, you know, just keeping it centered. best you can. That's
Well,
all you can hope for.
Yeah, absolutely. So you work with one of the most well-known logistics providers in the space. Like you are an institution. We call it Dial a Truck. But what is DAT?
Yeah, so we are the largest marketplace for freight in North America. This will be our 45th anniversary here in not even a few weeks anymore. I think it's the first week of April is our 45th anniversary. Founded in Portland, Oregon, Jubit's truck stop. They used to line up and look at TVs and go to payphones to find freight. And now we have something like 2 million trucks, brokers, carriers, shippers, all coming to the watering hole, so to speak, to find loads, to find trucks, to gain pricing and data insights. That's probably the last 10 to 12 years. That product has really been something we've become known for. So now we're DAT Freight and Analytics.
That's right.
I've actually been around DAT for about over 10 years now, because I was at FedEx. So every customer event, they changed names quite a bit in the early days. So it was DAT by TransCore powered by DAT Solutions, and now DAT Freight and Analytics. So I've got the polos to prove that I've been a 10-year customer. So
you're chief of analytics. What does the chief of analytics do for DAT? What are you living and breathing every day?
So I have the best job in the industry, honestly. So I have responsibility for product development, data science, our commercial analytics team, our data operations team, our industry analysis team, and at least in the interim here, our engineering folks I've been looking after in the interim. So it's a terrific team. When I left FedEx, one of my biggest concerns, since I hired most of my team, was kind of replicating that. And I've got to say that I'm surrounded by 60 of just the brightest, most curious, driven folks in the entire industry, and I couldn't be luckier to occupy the seat that I have.
Now, so my story in supply chain is like, I go back to my father, right? So he was a roadway guy back in 76.
Oh, Akron. Yeah.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. And it was back before deregulation. So I was looking up DAT. You guys were out there in like the late 70s or so.
78.
78. Yep. So right before deregulation. And deregulation is not like a light switch. It was a process over time. But those days were so different. I mean, this was the days of union carriers. It was only a few big companies, Roadway, Yellow, Consolidated Freight, UPS out there. FedEx didn't exist necessarily in the way that they are today. But in 91, my dad started a company called Outsourced Fleet Services. And our first customer was RPS, which later
FedEx Custom Critical.
Exactly. And RPS eventually became FedEx Ground. So we were the largest maintenance provider for Ground for, 20 some odd years. And I think like, in this industry, we look at the people who are rising up, and these are people who've come through these programs. So you were at FedEx. Like, what was like at FedEx when you were there?
So FedEx, in my opinion, is one of the best companies in the world. Pretty much anything you hear about them, they're not that. It's not pay for play when they make those lists. Leadership from top to bottom. When I was there, was terrific. I had wonderful mentors. Very trusting leadership. They pushed you to try new things and take risks, and there's a lot changing there now, right? A lot of like those low digit badge numbers, like when Fred Smith logs into his computer, it's 1 and then his password. Like a lot of that's changing. And with Raj coming in, he's been there for a long time, the new CEO. So it was just terrific. And the experiences, one day I'd be working on pricing expedited freight, and the next minute I'd be doing process engineering for customs clearance processes in rural Mexico, Toluca and Celaya and all of that. So the experiences were terrific. The one thing about FedEx that's unique is that their mission statement isn't just something they put in corporate letterhead. It's on when you get hired, every building has a wall that you sign, and it's the Purple Promise. It's I'm going to make every customer experience outstanding. And that's a unique North Star, because you wonder when you're working on a project or talking to a customer or solving a problem, am I making their experience outstanding?
Yeah.
And it sounds cheesy, but it's really, I can remember there'd be times when we'd get driver complaints, and our head of operations walked into my office late one night. We were both still in the office, white as a ghost. And Fred got a driver complaint directly sent to him, and he called this head of operations to ask what was going on, and asked that he follow up once he kind of cleared the issue up with the driver. So that's the kind of company FedEx is.
Well, I find them so fascinating because like the stories that I hear is FedEx was an airline that happens to have delivery, and UPS was a delivery company that happen to have some planes. But the fleet of FedEx, its plane fleet, is one of the fourth or fifth largest in the world. I mean, this is
It was the
incredible.
largest in the world at one point when I was there.
Oh my gosh. It's
I mean, especially in terms of like lift capacity. I mean, it's remarkable. I mean, when you think about, I mean, we got the cool stuff that you see in the news every day, like the shipping, when the oil spill happened, the shipping the turtles and wildlife from the Gulf to get, covered in Dawn and cleaned up. We moved polar bears and whales and King Tut and the T-Rex. We moved from Bozeman to the Smithsonian. So that's the stuff that got the attention. But it was really cool to watch it from the outside when the COVID vaccine happened, because I knew it was very familiar to me what had to happen to pull that off.
Yeah.
And yeah, it is remarkable. In the consistency, when you go around the world and see how FedEx operates at a station in rural Mexico compared to Canton, Ohio, it's a lot of similarity, right? It's a lot of people rowing in the same direction. And that's pretty much the only way I think you can get 500,000 people worldwide to deliver a similar experience, is to be rowing in the same direction.
Absolutely. What I love about the FedEx as an organization was just how innovative they were, early on. So like the idea of outsourcing critical things. So having independent, for ground, for example, having independent contractors incorporate businesses, have their own fleets, operate as individual entities, but then still give that same customer experience across the entire United States. And we have this, like, over the last couple of months, people have been like, oh, AB5, it's the end of the world. Like, dude, FedEx has been doing this for 50 years. Like, don't pretend like this is some novel problem. They know how to solve it. And the industry knows too. They just don't want to do it because it's hard. It's hard to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's very hard. It's an interesting analytical problem too, right? To make sure that, because at FedEx, it was always about making sure that we were using the model for the right reason, and to make sure the contractors were whole and can make a living, make a living out of doing it, right? You want successful regional service providers, because they're your face. Fred used to say things like, FedEx, people open their door, I forget how many millions of times a day when we ring the doorbell. That's remarkable to think about, right? It's like that level of trust. Like, I don't question when a UPS driver or a FedEx driver comes to my door. With some of how these third-party regional delivery services, or these even crowdsourced delivery services, when my Ring doorbell goes off at 4 a.m. and someone's on my porch, it's like, I don't know.
Yeah. And great point. That, so like, we look at Amazon as this amazing, innovative entity and their final mile and everything. It's like, it's just FedEx Ground. Like, they just said that looked good, we should do that too. And then they did it. And there's some differences, I imagine.
Well, the big difference is they don't have AWS, which is generating something like $22 billion of free cash flow. I mean, that would have been nice at FedEx to have just some orb of free cash flow in Memphis, Tennessee, that we could just go borrow from at any point in time. But unfortunately, transportation providers don't have services that they charge a lot of money for that are effectively free to produce.
That's right.
It's a nice little chip to have in your stack.
It's a nice tool in the toolbox that can help you make ends meet if you have a difficult quarter when it comes to retail sales.
It's like bragging that you got a deal on your Ferrari, All
right. So what makes you make the change, right? So you're at FedEx. What makes you say, I want to go into what this freight marketplace? What made you think that was the change you wanted to make?
I mean, I wanted to work at DAT for a while. I was just looking for a smaller company, and I spoke at one of their conferences and went to dinner, and it became evident that was a mutual interest, and they were open to me not moving. So I wasn't leaving the great state of Ohio, as you can tell.
Yeah,
even though I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, I'm a transplant to the flatland. But I mean, when I started out, it was very small. I think it was me plus 5 or 6 folks on my team. As I mentioned to start, we're at 60 now. So I knew the potential. I knew what I was doing with the data, and I knew how few of my peers were doing the same thing. And that's a unique insight to come into a company and be able to take what I was able to do, plus more, and help other folks do the same thing and grow a business that way. So,
yeah. Well, I look at like DAT. So initially it's just kind of connecting supply and demand. Like, so here's freight you want to move. Here's a truck driver who's nearby. You look at the monitor, you make a phone call, you get the stuff. But I guess like you come in and your team, as you build, is like, let's look at this data. Let's figure out ways to make this stuff more useful. And is that kind of how the genesis of your team kind of goes?
Yeah. I mean, when I started, it was pretty much one rating product. Everyone knows RateView, right? Mm-hmm. As a point of pride, so I'm big on getting newbies on our team out to visit customers, not just new people, even like existing people.
Yeah.
Everyone should go see customers. And it's always an interesting point of pride where I'm like, how many desks do you think we're going to get before they have the old products were RateView and Power? Now it's rate view and DAT1. How far do you think we'd have to get down the aisle before you see someone in one of their 4 monitors having one of our products up?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
they're like, what are you talking about? They're not going to, I mean, they have their more important stuff to look at. And like you get in and it's right there, like the first
Yeah.
person, like the receptionist has rate view up. And it's a humbling, but we've grown. We made an acquisition. We acquired FMIC from Chainalytics during my tenure here. We've gotten into the shipper business. We've launched a predictive rating product, Ratecast, which is growing at like 200 and some % adoption.
Wow.
It's helping people do RFPs. So again, I'm still not even halfway down the list of problems I was solving with the DAT data to put those into product. So we've got a lot of runway to build new and exciting products, which is
That's incredible.
just super fun.
So like what people should they, because you guys have the most market share, right? Like when it comes to the load board stuff, it's basically a combination of like you guys, Truck Stop. There's new ones like greenscreens.ai. There's 123 load board. Like how big is this market when it comes to brokering or helping people find freight?
Yeah, we're the largest by like an order of magnitude. I don't mean that that's just kind of the way that it is. And I mean, I think it's a pretty big market, right? Brokerage. I think brokerage as a whole, the estimates vary. Like probably pre-COVID, it was 80 to 100 billion dollars. My guess is it's substantially more than that now, right? When it's easier for me to do the math. So if you look at transportation, is probably $1 trillion market is what we kind of anchor on. Roughly half of that's for hire, and then the other half being private and dedicated. Spots roughly 15, depending on market conditions, it's 15 to 20% of all for hire transportation. So that's what's been interesting, Matthew, during the pandemic is brokers have been a lot more successful at RFPs, right? So brokers have to buy and sell. We know that to be true. And during the pandemic, shippers have been much more willing to give brokers more contract business. So what's been a byproduct of that is the more contract business brokers get, they still end up moving that freight in the spot market. So if me and you have a contractual, if you're Walmart and I'm broker A, and I win your load on RFP, I'm still going to the market to procure that truck. So the spot market has actually been a little bit more resilient coming out of this slow, entering into and coming out of the slow period because they see more volume flowing because of that contract phenomenon. But yeah, that's sort of an overview, I think, at a pretty high level.
That's interesting. What I'm curious about is like, we see all this like innovation on autonomous trucks and these things like that might eventually make brokers somewhat go away. I don't think that's going to happen anytime in the near future, but how important is it for brokers to have access to tools like this? Like, can you even run a brokerage without having these types of pricing tools and these capacity management tools?
I mean, so the easy kind of joke would be, no, you wouldn't be in business very long. But I think like there's a long tail of brokers that serve. I mean, there's entire brokerages that serve one customer, right? They're like, just a pro. And if you have a good relationship with a carrier, and if you're maybe like the non-asset side of an asset carrier, maybe you don't, right? Your cost base, and you're just trying to clear a hurdle rate. So I won't show hubris and say that everyone needs our tools. I think the evidence would suggest that attachment rate of any broker over $10 million of annual revenue is astronomically high for some level of rating tools. And again, it's not you put blind faith in these tools. It is a lot of times a starting point or a triangulation point for what it'll eventually cost to move this load.
Well, so what I'm excited to get to some of the questions I've had over the last couple of days. So this has been by far the most interesting conversation in terms of like background chatter coming in to talk to you. So I'm excited. I'm so excited. Before we get to that stuff, like I want you to help me define a couple terms, because there's terms that are terms of art in the industry. If you're not a supply chain person, no idea what it would be. So let's start off with what is a freight broker? Because you talked about it before about having to manage two different sides of a thing, but what is a freight broker doing necessarily?
Yeah, so a freight broker is an intermediary between a shipper and a carrier. So why do shippers want to use freight brokers? Because on average, a freight broker of any size is going to have anywhere from 10 to 50,000 carriers in their Rolodex, right? That they've vetted, that they've onboarded, they have their insurance certs loaded up, and then they have access to our capacity, which is another 150,000 carriers. Now, if you're a shipper, no shipper has ever identified themselves as a shipper, right? If I'm Kellogg's, I make cereal.
Yeah,
right?
that's right. Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
but we in the industry view Kellogg's as a shipper, just as an example.
Yeah, exactly.
So that shipper might want to have like 10, 20, I mean, at the high end, 50 carriers in their system. And once they can't find coverage through contract means, they go to a freight broker, or and what I mentioned earlier, they have contractual relationships now with brokers.
Mm-hmm.
So the load goes to the broker, and that shipper is like, I'm trusting you to find capacity, good capacity. They're not going to steal my freight. They're not going to be late. They're not going to damage my freight, et cetera, et cetera. And so the broker then springs into action, and they say, okay, I'm going to go find a truck. They find a truck, they move the freight, they take on average, everyone, an industry average margin, right? And by average, we mean that there's some shipments that have higher margins, some shipments that have lower margin.
200%, is that average?
Yep. But then talk to a broker that lost $3,000 on a load, right? That they misquoted and they wanted to honor their commitment. So they move the load. The carrier gets paid by the broker. The shipper pays the broker. And then the difference between those two is hopefully an industry average profit for that broker over the long arc of time. That's really what's interesting, Matthew, that most people don't know. There's a lot of talk about broker transparency right now.
Yes, there is. That's the next question we're leading up to.
So interestingly, brokers originally existed to be the outsourced sales and marketing folks for carriers.
Yeah.
And those transparency laws were originally put into place to make sure that brokers were getting paid their fair share, because a lot of times they would get compensated on a percentage basis of the load.
Yeah.
So to make sure that the carriers weren't shortchanging the brokers, because a lot of times the direct contractual relationship could have existed between the carrier and the shipper. So the industry has certainly evolved, no doubt. But brokers have played a pretty vital role in this industry for a long time, and I suspect that they will for quite a while going forward.
Well, that's a great segue to understanding these terms that I hear thrown around a lot. One being co-brokering, and another one being double brokering, or something to that kind of effect.
Yeah.
My understanding of co-brokering is that everybody who's doing it knows who's involved. So if I'm the shipper, let's say a manufacturer or something, and I go to one broker and that broker says, I'm going to broker to somebody else, everyone in that chain knows who the people are. They all have their certificates of insurance. They're all working together. They have a contract that says we're all good. And then there's this thing called double brokering. What is double brokering, if there's a way to kind of define that term? As you might
I don't think there's a canonical way, right?
Yeah,
I don't think there's like a Merriam-Webster's for this kind of thing. When I was in the industry, and largely fortified by a different view of it now, I think it breaks down how you described. I mean, there's a lot of really good reasons for a non-asset motor carrier number to move on move a load with another non-asset provider. I mean, a lot of times, especially the way any large carrier now has a non-asset division, right? So if a load comes in and they don't have, and a lot of them are using that for the interface with the shipper. So if that load comes in and they can't put on one of their trucks, they most likely have a predetermined agreement, so they don't have to check every single time, that outsourced, vetted, what we would call like a QOC, a qualified outside carrier, is permitted. So you go to the market and then you tender that with a qualified outside carrier, and you go from there. Double brokering has largely come to denote when parties aren't involved. So this would be a carrier. One of the most common ways it happens is a broker posing as a carrier takes a load, and then they go and give it to another carrier or another broker, right? I mean, there's examples I'm sure you can find out there of quintuple.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
Brokered loads. So basically, that's all happening without the owner of the freight having any idea what's happening.
And that's one of the things we talk about. So the FMCSA, which is the regulatory body that kind of governs over transportation and all these different aspects, they've kind of stayed away from this idea of double brokering. I think there's a lot of reasons for it, but at the end of the day, if the freight gets delivered on time and undamaged, no one's really complaining about it. It's only if there's some.
Yeah, I think people are still complaining about it. I think the FMCSA is taking an interesting stance on a lot of things, right? I mean, what's the percentage of carriers right now without a safety rating? It's like 92%, something.
Well, because they go out of business and they make a new one and they haven't been inspected yet. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I think my stance on this this is not something that the FMCSA is going to come in and fix. So this is an industry problem, and it's going to require industry participation and cooperation to fix it.
Where does DAT fall in that? This is some of the questions we kind of have. We're going to kind of go through a little bit of them. Like, what is DAT's relationship to help people figure out if someone's a double broker or something like that? Or is it more like let someone make reports and then they can be banned from the platform? Like, how does that process work?
Yeah, so full disclosure, I will share my thoughts and comments as they're appropriate. This is not my area of expertise. I'm sure if our compliance people are listening, they're cringing, like waiting for what I'm about to say. So I'm going to steer clear of acting or pretending to be an expert, just FYI. So in general, we do have tools and videos, and we've partnered with folks to help kind of at all points to ensure that, not just double brokering, but if you're a carrier, to make sure you're going to get paid and all that stuff
absolutely.
and a lot of times, like, these complaints that come in are from a broker or from a carrier that didn't get paid from a broker. And we pick up the phone and we're like, hey, did you send in your POD? And they're like, oh, crap, I forgot to. So it's like, we're here to help. We want, in a multi-sided network, there's nothing more important than to us than kind of that mutual trust between brokers and carriers and all the different parties. But yeah, we have a compliance team, a really, really good compliance team. I know a lot of those folks personally. We investigate every single report of fraud or nefarious activity to resolution. And that's to the extent of where my expertise probably leaves us. I just spent some time with our compliance team. I had a chance to travel earlier this week. I'm always impressed by their tenacity to say, I think you have to be quite tenacious to be in that field. And we've got some of the most, I'd say, tenacious folks in the industry in that regard. But beyond that, I'm probably maybe another guest from DAT at some point.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of touch on like the scale of what you guys do. Like, how many loads a day are moved through your platform?
So let me level set with the easiest stat. So we consider a load post, a truck post, or a load or truck search, a transaction. We see 250,000 of those per minute.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's that order of scale. During the height of the pandemic, across all three equipment types, we were seeing 7 to 10 million load posts a week. When we're really busy, because I need to wrap my head. I know it sounds crazy in my role and title, but I need to simplify down to easier numbers to understand. I always look to see how many dry van load posts we have per week. And when that's above 1 million per week, we're busy. When it dips down to 8 to 900,000, and Dean Croak reports on a lot of this. It's a good barometer.
He's phenomenal.
Yeah. So that's when we're really, really busy. We have roughly 140,000 carriers at the moment, representing 1.5 or 1.8 million trucks, 10,000 brokers, and I think 1,500 shippers in our network. So that's kind of the rough points of scale.
Yeah, because I think people kind of forget like just how much moves. And so we all think about, we have, price increases, or we have all these challenges with double brokers, but it's probably a fraction of a fraction based on the total amount that's out there. And you can't run a company without having access to pricing tools or loads that you're going to be moving. So I can see why some people were so animated about our discussion today.
Yeah. And I mean, like, we are the largest, and therefore, I think you become a figurehead in a way. But I mean, we strive to have a safe and secure platform. As I mentioned, we have our compliance team and their investigative abilities. But that's really, the orders of scale. When I joined, I think we had something like 60,000 carriers in 2019, and to have before the pandemic kind of pared some of that back a little bit. Not much, surprisingly, but I think we topped out at like 150,000. So that order, like the scale of, and it's not, the reason we think about scale isn't just customers and inbound calls. It's the systems have to literally support the increased load. And we went through a whole platform transition with DAT1. So a lot of moving pieces at DAT.
Well, and it's fascinating because what I like about the trajectory you've kind of outlined is carriers are becoming more accustomed to technology. I mean, you cannot run a business without the right technology, processes, and people. And so this is one of these things you cannot get away without having access to. Why in the world would you come into supply chain to begin with, Ken? Like, what went wrong in your childhood to go, I want to get into the business where most people are frustrated? Nothing is easy. I mean, driving a truck, just for the people who are watching, is one of the top 10 most dangerous jobs in the United States. Most dangerous jobs. And you come running in. Why would you do this?
Because my last job was one of the highest likelihoods to end up in jail for fraud. I was into regulated energy, right? So, Enron, the largest utility in Ohio, is embroiled in a scandal where pretty much everyone from top to bottom got fired, and the Ohio Speaker of the House is under felony investigation. It was arrested on the whatever they call it, the Congress floor of Ohio, State House floor. So awesome analytical problem. Like I think the deregulation of energy and how to price those contracts and understanding how the different customers, like whether you have an electric water heater versus a gas water heater. If you're a nerd, that is just like, holy cow, those are awesome analytical problems. So I came into this thinking it was going to be super boring. Like I'd do a stop here, get FedEx on my resume. I fell in love. I could probably work for 100 years in this industry and not even overturn half of the curiosity rocks that I have.
Yeah, right? There you go. You love problems. You love interesting problems.
And you become, I think this industry grips you, right? The people are so interesting. They're so well-intentioned. I mean, by and large, again, I'm talking about like the 99.999%, not the 0.001%. It's so vital to everything we do, and it's never predictable. Like the problems that we deal with in 2023 are so insanely different than the problems we were dealing with in 2013 that I can't imagine that 2033 is going to be even remotely resemble. It's probably going to be like what happens when people hack driverless trucks, and that's new double brokering scheme. It's like, oh, well,
that's a great, you're right on the money there, because at the end of the day, every single thing that's out here is supply chain. Like whether it's building houses, making products, delivering things to people's houses, or doing things all across the world, like it is something to do with logistics. So any problem that any industry has, we get to help solve it, whether we want to or not. We just kind of have to do it. Did you know coming in that you don't get to leave? Did anyone tell you that? Like when you get into
I guess, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's such a blank stare, right? So keep in mind, I'm interviewing a lot of, I went from interviewing like a lot of industry pricing people, and, I'd get to sit on panels with ops folks we'd bring in at FedEx. But now it's like, imagine a fresh computer science or data science grad sitting there. They're probably interviewing with like 2 fintech companies, Amazon, and then us. And you got this dope with an Ohio State pullover on telling you freight's awesome. But then you bring them out to a customer visit and they're like, wow, so these people have computers? Once they get over the initial shock that it's not like pencil and paper.
That's right.
They're like, their network optimization team has like 4 PhDs in ops research from Emory, and I'm like, yeah, pennies matter. Any industry where energy, logistics, where pennies matter, you're going to see this the money's not spent the way you think, right? It's spent in efficiency and operations and fuel management and all of that. And so this industry really gets their hooks into people.
Well, you're exactly right. It's so fascinating because like your biggest expense as a trucking company is generally fuel, followed by labor, followed by the assets, followed by maintenance, followed by tires and insurance. And you say, okay, that just sounds reasonable. Like your people are driving every day. They're all across the country. You don't know what's going to happen if they break down. Who needs to know? Who's relying on it? This idea of like just-in-time fulfillment, like no one has enough of what they need. They're all en route. Like they'll have when they need it, when it gets there. It's just it's a really interesting, challenging coordination problem. And coordination problems are really fun to solve.
I think people like evidence of their work. And it doesn't have to be seeing your product out there, right? It's like I could probably make a lot more money and be a lot less busy if I went and like sold my soul to do like online advertising for social media. Right? I probably could do that. Like who couldn't, right? You just got to be a terrible person. But when I'm driving down the truck and I don't mean this to be like misty or like cheesy, but like you tell your kids like, oh, see that big orange truck, Schneider? Like, we went to visit them last week and we got to see, or when I was at FedEx and I come back and I bring like a little you fly into the Peoria airport, right? You could buy a model Caterpillar,
right?
That's right. Loader. It's like I went and visited them. And when our people get to go and see that software on our users, there's this feedback loop and they feel connected. And that's not something you get in a lot of different. I did this at the power company too, right? Like I would sign up for every tour of all the different coal and nuclear power plants and just how they worked. And when you're driving down the lakeshore and you see Davis Bessie, hopefully not too close. One of those had a big crack in it. You don't want to go too close to one of those, but there's evidence of what you do,
Yeah.
And I think that's just really important.
Well, that's what I loved about the maintenance business, right? So I could touch the trailers for Seva or Old Dominion or Saia or FedEx or UPS. And you're like, my team fixed that. We kept them on the road. We kept them safe. And that is something that's tangible. It's not the same as like the law world. And I love law. I love practicing law, but it's a lot of just paper back and forth. You don't really touch and see and do those things. Whereas with heavy duty equipment, I mean, kids love trucks. love trucks. And anybody who has a passion for this business, it makes me excited because it is all the things, and getting to visit customers and see them using your technology, that's got to be exhilarating. Got to be absolutely exhilarating.
Yeah, I mean, we don't build good. If you don't visit your customers, you don't build good products, right? The era where you knew best and you sat behind a closed door and magically revealed software at TIA is gone. Like that ship has sailed. That's not how this thing works anymore. It's constant feedback. It's starting slow. I think it's a lot of like customer education, right? Because the new way you build software is you start slow and crappy and slow.
Yeah.
Like the product is slow and it's maybe a little bit buggy. And people have, our industry maybe isn't as tolerant of that out of the gate. So it's been a lot of helping them along. But in that way, if you're willing to put up with some of the bugginess and not having everything you want at launch, you have a much bigger thumbprint on it as a customer than what the finished product eventually looks like. And I think that's the promise that you deliver on. And you got to build trust. I mean, this business, for how big it is, still motivate, still kind of, there's a lot of momentum around trust. And
absolutely.
You need to have that. So
this is the biggest small industry in the world.
Like, it's crazy.
You go to any of these trade shows or any of these conferences, it's like, there's the group that you recognize, like it's a tribe. It's a small business, but it's such a massive part of every bit of this country. And
it's like 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon on steroids. I was just at dinner earlier this week with a customer. It's like, oh, so-and-so? He's like, no, so-and-so. I was in his father's wedding. I'm like,
exactly. Well, you see, the people come, like our generation now, we're seeing the folks that came from FedEx or UPS in their careers. When we were getting into the business, they were all yellow or CF or roadway. It's just this tribal knowledge that gets passed down. And my biggest concern is we're making people not want to come to this industry. So I use the non-competes as an example, but we make it hostile for people who don't know what they're getting into. And then they're like, oh, this is a nightmare. What are you supposed to do? And then they abandon it. And we need people to realize that this path in supply chain, it's not just driving trucks or forklifts. It's doing analytics. It's doing all sorts of things. Like it is anything you want it to be is what supply chain is.
Yeah. I hope I'm not like Grandpa Simpson on that episode where it's like old man yells at cloud, but
that's right.
Brokerage is such a, it's an interesting industry in that there still is very much you've got to cut your teeth. You've got to earn it. Right.
Yeah.
If you want to get into analytics at a brokerage, it's pretty hard to get hired off the street to do that. A lot of those folks come in and got to spend a year or so. You do go through the training, you get off stipend. So to the extent that some of the more what are they calling them now? Gen Yers, whatever.
I have no idea. I'm 38. Everyone is too young or they're too old for me.
Yeah, it's funny. So I think if people are willing to kind of stick with it and get through that, I've seen people that have started as floor brokers that end up as like CTOs, CEO. I mean, like a lot of these folks that are running and owning large firms in the space now or decide to venture off into their own. But you kind of have to give it a little room. You've got to fall in love with the industry a little bit. It's not one of those things where you hop in and all of a sudden it's a rocket ship at times. Sometimes I feel like it's a slow burn. It's
a mixture of like love and hate. Like you love it. Like sometimes you absolutely hate it. Like those 3 o'clock in the morning breakdown calls. Like, I don't want to do that. That doesn't sound fun. But then it's just like, it's ups and downs. And like where people now, we have like a little bit of slowdown in the freight movement, or at least the pricing is different than it was a couple of years ago. But it's cyclical, right? Like this is a cyclical industry. It always has been, right?
I mean, since deregulation, what happens? Rates go low, trucking companies go out of business. It causes a shortage of capacity. Rates go up. People are like, holy cow, rates are high. I'm going to go buy a bunch of trucks. They buy too many trucks. It drives the rates down. A bunch of people go out of business and they go, holy cow, the rates have gone back up. I'm going to buy more trucks. So
absolutely.
I mean, whether you call it the coyote curve or the picket line or whatever you call it, like there's just this. Now, what's really interesting, right, is the last 2 cycles have been wild, right? You have ELDs that whipped the market into a frenzy in 17 and 18. And then 19 was one of the slowest, most painful years in trucking. And then you have COVID. So the cycles, the frequency is increasing, I guess you'd say, and the amplitude is certainly increasing. So it really is going to be interesting to see what this next cycle is like. Is it a muted cycle? Is there something we don't know about that's going to whip us into another frenzy? It's really hard to tell what this next. It's a tough time to be in long-term freight forecasting, let me tell you.
I can imagine. And we're seeing some credible deals, right? Like we just saw like last week, US Express being sold to Knight Swift. Like this is back to the battle of the bigs. This is crazy. These size of these deals that are happening.
I don't understand that one. Yeah. It's like buying an expired pack of Oreo cookies at Goodwill for $80.
I have a theory.
Let me
I
hear
think
it.
I think it's the value of the equipment. I think what
Yeah.
my fundamental belief is that whoever has the most trailers wins this supply chain. Having trailer capacity seems to be something that every shipper has a desire to have access to, and all these mega carriers are now turning these trailer groups that they have into power only opportunities for owner operators and kind of building their own little freight networks internally. And that's my long term thinking is whoever has the most trailers is probably going to win, but I don't know.
I mean, Knight's a great operator. I think, if anything, I mean, we're all friends. So, I mean, I don't mean this in a disparaging way towards US Express's management, but I don't know that empirically, they weren't a great operator. To be losing money, especially during COVID, I mean, it's like I think they may have
Yellow beat them out at one point. Yellow.
Yeah. Which, rebranded. Yeah. Anyhow. But yeah, I mean, to see like, what do they pay? $6 a share. It was trading at $1.50 a share and we're losing 88 cents a share. Like pretty much every finance textbook I've ever had would tell you that that's an interesting triangulation point. But yeah, if you have optimism around the operation and turning that around, running more miles per week, that's a quick way to dig out of that hole. And Knight knows how to do that. Knight Swift knows how to do that.
And then like you saw last year, I think it was UPS Freight got bought by TFI for $800 million.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I mean, this is like, that's former overnight people. So like overnight, then it was UPS Freight, but there's not many trucking companies that really can manage union drivers. Like that's for those who are watching, like pre-deregulation, 60% of truck drivers were unionized, 60%. They were making on average about $38,000 a year adjusted for inflation. It's like 120. Like you had a really good life as a truck driver back in those days.
Yeah.
It's not that way anymore. It's not that way.
Yeah, if you're a UPS driver, yeah, you might. I mean, a lot of UPS drivers have really nice boats by the time they turn 50, 60 years old where I live. I mean,
absolutely. And
yeah.
then I think there'll be more big deals this year. I think there's, with the market the way that's behaving, I think there's going to be people who have capital on hand to go, look, I want that equipment. Maybe there's customers they see value to, but I just think that getting those assets is going to be really important for a lot of these big carriers.
I think that's right.
See, I know what I'm talking about mildly. Okay. So what has you most excited for 2023?
So we're undertaking a lot of really great analytics projects. We were very fortunate, and this is a position that is not taken for granted. So we've continued growth and momentum, even though the economy has perhaps slowed down and the freight markets have slowed down. We're making some pretty big investments in the IQ side. So everyone knows and loves RateView. I think I saw this as a question that was coming up.
Yeah.
The RateView rate's not going anywhere, but we've got a lot of really great long time coming enhancements to the application itself. So some new ways to look at rates, some past, present, and future views, some ways that you can look at different accessorials like pieces, dims, weight, hazmat. We're making some big investments in our shipper side of our business. So the way shippers benchmark their spend, those are going to be some really big investments into bringing that into what we call IQ. So my side of the business is called IQ. Right now, some of those applications, the legacy ones, live outside of our core platform. We'll be bringing those in over the next year, which means it'll be faster. It'll look better, which why not?
Yeah, that's right.
And it'll be all behind like one login and all that fun stuff. Just a much more modern feel.
I think it'd be interesting if we could work together for your compliance folks to do like an Ask Me Anything on the Reddit stuff. I think that would be really interesting. I'm gonna push for you guys to think about that.
Again, that'd be like someone volunteering me to come on and do like an analytics teardown. I mean, I don't know that I'd want.
Well, it's interesting. Like so. For 2023, it seems like it's a weird kind of environment. So there are still people making good money in transportation, but it seems like the rates are much softer. So what can people expect for the next couple of months in this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the year definitely has the possibility to look like 19. So 19 wasn't a year where we saw a lot of downward rate movement. It moved down in the second half of 18 and just sat there all year. It was a very, very slow year. I do think that the inability to actually procure new Class 8 trucks over the last 2 years probably insulated the industry from some of that, right? There's not just these piles of trucks sitting around. I think spot rates will move up seasonally a bit. It depends on how fast contract rates can come down to meet them a little bit. Once you start to see those two things intersect, the year-over-year change in spot and contract rates, and right now the market's what we would call inverted, right? where it's much cheaper as a shipper to buy spot than it is contract. Once that goes back to normal, I think you'll start to see this next kind of cycle of the freight market, this next 12 to 18 month upswing, and then 12 to 18 month downswing.
I mean, if we just get, is the issue maybe consumers are afraid to be spending in terms of buying new things where inventory is not moving at these retailers? Is that part of the problem, or is it just?
I mean, it's part of the problem, right? It's soft demand, but it's you got to realize too. We talked about that 85-15, right? 85% of its contract, 15% of its spot. Small changes in the contract market have huge impacts to the spot market. So if routing guide compliance, and by that I mean the percentage of freight that the contract shippers are taking, if that increases even a little bit, it dramatically decreases the amount of available freight that comes to spot, right? So contract care, so those little things, I genuinely don't believe that it's less total freight, or not that much less freight moving around, right? It's not like we tend to and for a lot of good reasons and for a lot of kind of good commercial reasons, a lot of folks love to sensationalize that like there's either all the freight moving or none of the freight moving, right?
And none of it's moving now.
Walmart's either shipping and Target's shipping every load ever all the time, or they're literally not selling or moving anything. They've just
everything's burning down.
They're Scrooge McDuck on a pile of PlayStation 5s, right?
That's what sells eyeballs. It's fear. That's what people need to be paying attention to.
And it's really not the case, right? But I do think an approach you could take and get the same point across, even though it's a lot less sensational, is these small movements have huge impacts. Like we care a lot about the owner operator, right? We love our big fleets, but we care a lot about the owner operator. And they're the ones on the margin. So when these small marginal changes happen, if you can see what I'm doing with my fingers, these little marginal changes happen. They're so far removed from Walmart's private and dedicated and then contract fleet that it's like that whip effect, the bullwhip effect, where they're at the end of that whip hanging on for dear life and the ups and the downs. So I think this is going to be a period where they're probably not going to see a lot of material relief until Q3 of this year. My guess is the spring shipping season will be okay, delayed a little bit due to weather in Southern California. Like produce is a big harbinger for how the spring and early summer looks. It's been wet, which means we'll have a good produce season, but it'll be late, most likely. So I think it'll be a year of transition, a slow front half, a more marginally busier second half, which will be good, I think, for a lot of those fleets.
Well, that's a good point you bring on the owner operators. Like this is a hard business to be in. It's hard to find profitable loads. Every trucking company, multi-homes, trying to find here, I'll go for brokers here, I'll go direct here, I'll get a load board here. And it's not an easy process. And it's hard to find parking. It's hard to find bathrooms. It's hard to find everything. And then you're still out there chasing what might just be, break even. It's very challenging. And would you, like, as you think about this, what is going to be the place where owner operators are going to fit in the next, 6 months? Like, are they going to be parking trucks, would you think? Or do you think they're going to be out there still moving freight, just not at the rates that they were seeing, a year or two ago?
No, I think we're in arrears a bit of when that's happened. I mean, so 2022, imagine being the last one to get into this game in like January or February of 22. It's like I went and I paid $250,000 for a truck. I bought the most expensive trailer I could find because it was the only one I could find. I'm new, so my insurance rates are high. I have no idea what I'm doing, so I'm just taking every load I can find. You're probably the first to go out of business, right? I mean, and then if you trace from that like the last person in and the first person out, we lost probably a bunch of capacity that was only going to be successful under historically high rates. Those are the first to go.
Exactly.
Right? There's a whole cohort of those folks. And then you got the they can survive in most up markets, but as soon as the chips turn, they go back to being leased on or they exit the market. Problem is where we sit now, probably the last 3 to 4 months, we're losing a small, but unfortunately meaningful number of good owner operators. So ones that can operate in most conditions. We're just there at that little armpit, of where the market bottoms out. That moment when you wish you would have bought Apple stock is how I relate this to people. Like, I remember sitting in undergrad 301 finance and Apple was trading at like $88 a share. And I'm like, I should buy some of this.
Just get a job out of college, invest it all there. You'll be fine.
And I didn't. And then it went to like 500 adjusted for splits. But anyway, so like those people right now are going to kind of catch the unfortunate whipsaw of the market. But you can still make money. You're making less money. Dean has all the numbers, but we work with American Truck Business Services. They're making less money from a take-home perspective, but they can certainly still break even and operate. And if they can weather until, I'd say, midsummer, they'll probably be fine coming out the other end of it.
Are there problems that you see in 2023, or at least in the next few years, that are really interesting to you? Like, because this is a big industry, there's a bunch of different things happening. What are some of the things that keep you curious or worried about any of the things that are happening in supply chain?
I mean, I think one of the most unexplored frontiers is putting rating intelligence. So not rating as in like Yelp rating, but like
Yeah.
giving carriers, especially small carriers, more access to tools that help them on the revenue side of their business.
Yeah.
You know, the industry, a lot of times they've adopted technologies that help them with like fuel cars and legal services and parking, you mentioned, and a bunch of other things, discounted tire programs. So there's a lot of like support for them on the cost side. The revenue side for them is largely dominated by how well they negotiate.
Yeah.
And when you've got a broker or a shipper or a dispatcher on one end that has access to all of these tools and kind of the hive mind, right? It just, even if they didn't have tools, a 50-person brokerage has the collective knowledge of 50 people, right? And all of that's being pointed at that single moment of negotiation, that there's an inherent disadvantage. I would argue it's not a systemic or systematic disadvantage, but it is, quite frankly, just a disproportionate negotiating position.
Do you think there'll be some path to push for more transparency and say, okay, this is the margin, like brokers having to disclose what they make in a given load? You think
I don't think, even if they did, I don't know that it would matter. This is why I sort of think this whole broker transparency thing is like, it comes up every time the market comes into this armpit, right? Maybe we should coin that term, like you did, Armchair Attorney, the Adamo armpit.
That's right. I'm writing that down. We'll get that trademark.
No one was asking for broker transparency when everything was $3 a mile.
Yeah, no one complains when everyone's making money.
No.
Just when someone stops making money, they start freaking out.
What I was speaking more towards, and this is something there's a person on my team, and again, I all credit to my team because they're terrific. It's like, I'd love to solve an X dollar problem for carriers, like a problem that I can put into their lap and solve, and it would just make them X dollars more every time they used it, right? So like our rating products don't have a mobile capability, which makes sense because most times people are at a desk using them. So the big carriers that have so how can we, and again, this is over a longer arc of time, how can we build products and tools to make the average carrier more intelligent?
Yeah.
And make better decisions.
That's a great idea. I mean, if the technology could get back to the owner operators or the mid-sized fleets for them to figure out how they can find profitable work easier, that's a huge win for everybody, because it's really challenging when you're in the middle of nowhere trying to find something useful and you're just relying on someone who may not have your best interest at heart, because at the end of the day, everyone's trying to make money, and it's usually at the expense of the truck drivers. I mean, I go back to deregulation. We saved like $8 billion a year back in 1980 by doing deregulation, but that was off the backs of truck drivers and mechanics and dock workers. Like, you pay them less, and then you can save more. And that ends up making a supply chain that's not very resilient and not as effective as it otherwise could be.
Yeah. I think I was very, very lucky. So just as an aside, I've told this story many times, so I won't tell the long form story, but my operating company CEO at FedEx was like a pioneer, like very pioneer, first female CEO in the FedEx operating company. But this kind of customer obsession that I have was deeply rooted in the example that she set. So, she would set up a fake name in the dispatch system and go take what we would call a B unit, but like a cargo van, because you didn't need a CDL. And she'd get it all set up in the system, and she'd go sit at a truck stop and wait and wait. And she said the most painful thing, just like paralyzing thing, is just sitting there waiting, looking at the Qualcomm unit and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for a dispatch to come through.
Yeah.
And like, if you don't have, like, if you don't have that attachment to what they're dealing with, I mean, so I'd have to go, not have to, I was instructed to, and eventually relished the opportunity to go sit at a truck stop and find a custom critical driver and buy them breakfast and just talk about buy them breakfast and maybe comp their shower about how their day's going and what problems are they finding. Because I don't think you really know until I'll never experience it. I'm not going to go get my CDL and kind of get to that point. But the closer I can get to it, the closer my team can get to it, the closer our industry can get to like the front line of where the problem's happening, I think that's what we'll be able to make more of a difference.
Yeah.
Because factoring, like there's a whole exploration of how to get carriers paid. Because the problem isn't they need a factor. The problem is they need to get paid.
Cash flow business. The fuel has to be paid now. The tires have to be paid for now.
Like, so we've partnered with some really good factors that understand that, right? That kind of grew up in and around the industry and aren't banks that are trying to get in. You know what I mean? So like, I think that will be ultimately the technology and the companies that prevail in all this is the ones that place themselves adjacent to the customer, not kind of parochially looking down at the customer and saying, this is what you need.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just living that, like that uncertainty you kind of outlined, like that is the story of so many people. Like, I just want to get home. How do I get home? And am
Yeah.
I just going to deadhead home? Or am I going to wait for a load? And you have your kids back home. You're like, is this the job that I want to do? And I think like we see this innovation of, we talk about autonomous trucks a little bit, but I see this pathways. If the FMCSA puts out final rules around level 4 and level 5 automation, maybe that middle mile starts disappearing for a lot of carriers. Maybe not for a while. Maybe it happens over time, but getting drivers home at a regular interval, not away 270 days a year, may make it this more attractive profession. I mean, industry average like 120% churn every year. This is a broken industry. It's a broken industry.
I think that get me home is like, that is so important. I mean, I can remember being part of driver pay committees and study, at my old job. And it's like, would you rather make X% more or get home one free time a quarter? Like, I will, whether I have a load for you or not, I will pay you your loaded rate to get home. Like, what is this a trick question? Like, I want to go home.
Exactly.
I want to go home, and that to me is more important because it's like it's how like the electric car companies, like consumer car companies, are saying like it's what's the term they call it? Range anxiety.
Yeah, that's right.
So solving for range anxiety is what's leading to higher adoption of electric cars from people who typically wouldn't. And I think if drivers, you have this rubber band that stretches the further you get away from home, and that becomes much more resistant. If that tension, and I'm really torturing the analogy, if that tension was relieved, I think you'd see people much more free to move around and make better business decisions.
I could not agree more. So I have a couple more questions, and we'll take some more. I'll send you some notes afterwards. But dude, it's been great talking to you. So let's talk a little bit more on DAT as it relates to how you play with other partners. So you guys are you're one of the many technology tools that are used for all of these trucking companies. Is there a path where these things get integrated, connected, or is it all just a bunch of different windows people have to go back and forth to?
No, so I mean within DAT we're extremely well obviously we're interconnected, and then we have partners that we around the industry that we integrate with. We've partnered, just to, again, short list, I can name a lot more, but OTR Solutions is a really good partner of ours in the factoring space. And we've partnered with Parade, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners are involved with or at least familiar with. So we look for opportunities to be with really good partners where there's mutual benefit, right? Not just getting on their logo page and like, we're partnering with so-and-so. It's like, no, like it's a lot of work to be a bona fide partner, right? So
that's right.
On both sides. So we try to make them worthwhile. So with a lot of the TMSs, almost every broker TMS we have a partnership with, so that the customers, they want to use their data where they're operating. So a lot of big brokers are using the data and interacting with us through APIs in their TMS. So, we have really good partnerships there. And then, a lot of the industries, right? We're great partners with TIA and OIDA. So,
I think about things like parking. Like, are these problems? Because like you guys are closely aligned with the truck stops, I imagine, in terms of getting people around those places. Like, are there opportunities for parking combinations where you can help drivers find places to park and rest and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, again, I'm over my skis. I know that we've worked partnerships. Our new app, our new DAT1 mobile app, has a lot of those features that people have been using like crazy, right, to find parking and amenities. I know we do a lot of that. I'm a little bit ignorant to the specifics.
Okay. Well, the last thing I say is, where can people find more about DAT? Where can they find more about Ken Adamo?
Well, I don't know if they want to find out more about me. They can find me in my seat in section 23C at Ohio Stadium. But hopefully improving this year as part of the season ticket process. It's a bad year. No Notre Dame, no Michigan. I might improve my seating position. No, but we're every Tuesday at 10 a.m. So we host a show that's not, it's very cowboy or cowbell adjacent. So it's like Dean basically informing people of trends happening in the industry, and we answer listener questions. Ask IQ at DAT.com if you have any analytics questions. We actually have real analysts on my team that watch that inbox and respond. If you're like, hey, what's going on with this lane? I saw RateView had like a weird interquartile range. What's going on? Just send those over there. And then everything else, I think you can find at DAT.com. But
what about
on LinkedIn? Ken Adamo on LinkedIn.
There you go. Well, Ken, stick around. I'm going to say the goodbye to everybody, and then I'll be right back. So you stick around. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. All right, folks. There we go. Another one done, another conversation had. I am a huge fan of Dial a Truck. It's a great company. They do great work to help carriers find profitable loads, great for shippers to put their loads out there, and a great tool for all brokers. I love Ken Adamo. He's a great dude. I'm so excited for him to have 4 kids. He can live the nightmare that I live myself every single day. As always, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for helping us continue to get the message out about the supply chain. It is all the things. And as always, we'll see you next week. So I just hit the end broadcast button and it's all done. So have a great weekend. And then I hit the button.